The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 97 missed calls, all from the same number. The office landline that hadn't rung my personal cell in 3 years was now lighting up my screen like a Christmas tree at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. 4 days, that's all it took for everything to fall apart without me. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where workplace karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down. This is where the overlooked become unforgettable, where silence speaks louder than any resignation letter, and where sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping back and letting gravity do its work. If stories about workplace justice resonate with you, hitting that subscribe button helps us build a community that understands what it means to stand up by standing back. We're on our way to 8,000 subscribers, and every single one represents someone who knows their worth. Join us. My name is Greta Ashworth, and for 6 years, I was the senior systems engineer at Hartley Technologies, the person nobody thought about until everything stopped working. My parents raised me in a modest home where handshakes meant something, and a day's work deserved a day's pay. Those values taught me empathy, fairness, and the difference between loyalty and being taken for granted. I learned that lesson the hard way. Let me take things back to where this really started, not 4 days ago, but 6 months earlier, when I first heard whispers about the infrastructure director position opening up. The role had been vacant since April when Thomas Brennan retired after 23 years with the company. Everyone knew I was the natural successor. I'd been running the entire back-end operation practically solo for the last 2 years, ever since budget cuts eliminated half our team and nobody bothered replacing them. The servers, the security protocols, the overnight maintenance, the emergency patches, all of it landed on my desk with a smile and a "we know you can handle it, Greta." And handle it I did. Our uptime went from 94% to 99.7% under my watch. I'd personally architected the migration to our new cloud infrastructure, saving the company roughly $340,000 annually. I documented everything, trained the junior staff, and kept detailed records of every improvement, every saved dollar, every crisis averted at 2 a.m. while everyone else slept soundly. My manager, Douglas Pemberton, had all but promised me the position. During my annual review in March, he'd looked me straight in the eye and said, "Greta, you're the backbone of this operation. When Thomas leaves, that office has your name on it." I believed him. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was thinking that merit mattered more than bloodlines. June 16th. The date burned itself into my memory. Douglas called me into his office at 3 p.m., late enough in the day that most people were already mentally checked out, early enough that HR was still around to witness whatever needed witnessing. The moment I walked in and saw 2 people already seated, I felt something shift in my chest. Douglas sat behind his desk wearing his difficult conversation face, that practiced expression of concern that never quite reached his eyes. To his left sat a young man I'd never seen before, maybe 25, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. And to his right sat Howard Hartley himself, the company owner, whose visits to our floor were rarer than solar eclipses. "Greta, thanks for joining us," Douglas began, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please sit down." I sat, my leather portfolio balanced on my knees, containing the presentation I'd prepared for what I thought would be my promotion interview. "I wanted to introduce you to someone," Douglas continued, and the young man in the expensive suit extended his hand with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. "Greta, this is Austin Hartley, Howard's son. Austin recently completed his MBA from Stanford and will be joining our team." Austin's handshake was firm, practiced, and completely empty. "Great to meet you, Greta. I've heard you're the one who keeps the lights on around here." The casual dismissal in that phrase, reducing 6 years of expertise to "keeping the lights on," should have been my first warning. "Austin will be stepping into the infrastructure director role," Douglas said, and the words came at me like a physical blow. "We're really excited to have fresh perspectives in leadership, and with his educational background in business systems and strategic management, we feel he's the right fit to take the department in new directions." New directions, strategic management, fresh perspectives. All corporate euphemisms for the boss's son needs a job. Howard Hartley leaned forward, his expression friendly but utterly unconcerned with how this might land. Greta, you're a valued member of this team, and we're going to need your experience to help Austin transition smoothly. Think of yourself as the technical expert. You'll handle the day-to-day operations while Austin focuses on the bigger picture, the strategic vision. Translation: do all the actual work while the kid who couldn't tell a server rack from a filing cabinet takes the credit, the salary, and the title. Of course, we'll be adjusting your compensation to reflect your expanded mentorship role, Douglas added quickly. A 3% increase, effective next month. 3%. For training my own replacement, someone who'd be making triple my salary to do half the work. Every cell in my body wanted to explode. 6 years of coming in early, staying late, sacrificing weekends, carrying the entire technical infrastructure on my shoulders, and this was my reward. Watching someone born on third base pretend he hit a triple, while I was expected to applaud and hand him the bat. But here's what they didn't expect: I didn't explode. Years of my father's advice echoed in my head. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all. So I smiled, not a big smile, that would have been obvious, just a small professional acknowledgement. I shook Austin's hand again and said, "Congratulations, welcome to the team." The relief in Douglas's face was almost comical. He'd been braced for tears, anger, threats of resignation, the emotional responses that would have let them dismiss me as difficult or not a team player. Instead, he got perfect corporate compliance. "That's wonderful, Greta," he said, shoulders visibly relaxing. "I knew we could count on your professionalism. Austin starts Monday, so if you could prepare some orientation materials, maybe an overview of our current systems, that would be tremendously helpful." "Absolutely," I said. "I'll put something together." The meeting lasted another 15 minutes, full of empty words about exciting transitions and collaborative opportunities. I nodded in all the right places, asked polite questions about Austin's background, and excused myself at exactly the appropriate moment. I walked back to my desk, set down my portfolio with its useless presentation, and sat very still for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and started making plans. Not angry plans, anger makes you sloppy. Not revenge plans, revenge is just anger with patience. No, I was making practical plans based on a simple realization. If my expertise and dedication didn't matter to them, then neither would my absence. But I wouldn't quit. Quitting would give them exactly what they wanted: a clean exit, no unemployment complications, and the narrative that I couldn't handle not getting promoted. Instead, I would give them exactly what they'd asked for. I would do my job, nothing more, nothing less. For 6 years, I'd been doing the work of 3 people. I'd been fixing problems before they became emergencies, staying late to patch vulnerabilities, monitoring systems from home, responding to alerts at all hours. None of that was in my job description. All of it had been voluntary, the extra effort that separates adequate employees from invaluable ones. Starting tomorrow, I would be adequate. The rest of that Friday passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Colleagues who'd heard about the decision offered sympathetic looks and carefully worded condolences. Janet from accounting actually apologized, which was sweet but unnecessary. Tim from sales called it complete bullshit, which was accurate but unhelpful. I thanked them all and went about my day. At 5 p.m. exactly, not 5:30 or 6 p.m. like usual, I shut down my computer, gathered my things, and left the office. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I completely disconnected. No checking emails, no monitoring server alerts, no remote logins to fix whatever minor crisis might be brewing. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with an automated alert about unusual CPU usage on server cluster B. Normally, I would have logged in immediately, diagnosed the issue, and resolved it within an hour. Instead, I silenced the notification and went to the farmer's market. Sunday afternoon brought 3 more alerts, each one escalating in urgency. The kind of warnings that usually had me hunched over my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, preventing small problems from becoming catastrophic ones. I went to a movie instead, a matinee. I bought popcorn. Monday morning arrived with the particular dread that comes with knowing your workplace has fundamentally changed. Austin Hartley would be sitting in the office that should have been mine, probably rearranging furniture and picking out desk accessories while having no idea what the actual job entailed. I arrived at exactly 8:30 a.m., my contracted start time, parked in my usual spot, and rode the elevator to the third floor with the same group of half-awake colleagues I'd been sharing the ride with for 6 years. Douglas had organized a department meeting for 9 a.m. to officially introduce Austin. The conference room was packed, not because people were excited, but because attendance at these things was mandatory. Austin stood at the front of the room in another expensive suit, this one navy blue with a burgundy tie that probably cost what I spent on groceries in a month. Howard Hartley stood beside him like a proud parent at a school recital. "I just want to say how excited I am to be here," Austin began, his voice carrying that particular confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "I know I have big shoes to fill with Thomas's departure, but I'm looking forward to bringing some innovative approaches to how we think about infrastructure." Innovative approaches? The kid had been here for 20 minutes. "My philosophy is that technology should serve business goals, not the other way around. Too often, departments get caught up in technical details and lose sight of the bigger picture. I want us to be strategic partners, proactive rather than reactive, always asking how we can drive value." It was impressive, really, an entire paragraph of business school jargon that said absolutely nothing. Several people were nodding, though, either out of politeness or genuine inability to recognize empty buzzwords. "Of course, I'm here to learn from all of you, especially Greta." He gestured toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you've been the technical anchor of this team, and I'm counting on your expertise as we move forward." The room shifted slightly, everyone suddenly very interested in their coffee cups or phones or the fascinating texture of the conference table. They all knew what had happened. They all knew this was wrong. But nobody said anything. Nobody ever does. The meeting wrapped up with Douglas outlining some upcoming projects and reminding everyone about proper channels for technical requests, which would now go through Austin for prioritization and strategic alignment before reaching the people who actually did the work. As people filed out, Austin made his way over to my desk. "Hey Greta, you got a minute?" "Sure," I said, not standing up or offering the deference he was clearly expecting. "I was hoping you could walk me through the daily operations. You know, what breaks, what needs watching, the stuff that's not in the documentation." The stuff that's not in the documentation. He meant all the institutional knowledge I'd accumulated over 6 years, all the quirks and workarounds and critical details that lived in my head because I'd never had time to write them down while actually keeping everything running. "The documentation covers our standard procedures," I said pleasantly. "The system architecture overview, maintenance schedules, escalation protocols, it's all in the shared drive under infrastructure docs." "Right, yeah, I saw those files," Austin said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "But I mean the real day-to-day stuff. Like, what do you actually do when you get here in the morning?" "Check the overnight logs, verify backup completion, review any alerts, respond to tickets in the queue. It's all outlined in the operations manual, Section 3. His jaw tightened slightly. He wasn't used to people being unhelpful, even when they were technically answering his questions. "Okay, well, maybe we could set up some regular check-ins. Morning briefings or something, so I can get up to speed." "Of course," I said. "Just send me a meeting invite and I'll make sure it's on my calendar." The politeness was key. Every word professional, every response exactly what HR would consider appropriate cooperation. No insubordination, no attitude, no grounds for discipline. Just absolute minimum compliance. Austin lingered for another moment, clearly expecting something more, enthusiasm, maybe, or volunteered information, or the kind of eager mentorship that would make his transition comfortable. Instead, he got a neutral smile and the soft click of my keyboard, as I returned to the ticket queue. He walked away, and I allowed myself the smallest satisfied breath. The first day passed smoothly, because Mondays always did. The real test would come that night, when the nightly maintenance window opened and the servers needed their routine updates and patches. Work I normally did remotely after dinner, ensuring everything ran smoothly for the Tuesday morning rush. At 5 p.m., I shut down my workstation and left. No checking in remotely, no monitoring the maintenance scripts, no standing by in case something went wrong. I went home, made myself a proper dinner, garlic butter salmon with roasted vegetables, and watched 3 episodes of a show I'd been meaning to catch up on. Around 9 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Server alerts. Minor at first, a failed backup on one of the development servers, then a warning about disk space on the email system. I silenced my phone and took a bath. By Tuesday morning, the minor issues had compounded. The failed backup had triggered a cascade of errors. The disk space warning had become a critical alert. 2 servers had gone into protection mode and shut down non-essential services. I arrived at 8:30 a.m. to find Austin already at his desk, looking stressed, and Douglas hovering nearby with the expression of someone trying very hard not to panic. "Greta, thank God," Douglas said when he saw me. "We've got multiple systems showing errors. Did you see the alerts last night?" "I did," I said calmly, setting down my bag and logging into my workstation. "They came through around 9 p.m. And," Douglas's voice had risen slightly. "And I wasn't on call," I said, pulling up the error logs. "The on-call rotation is posted in the shared calendar. Last night was Kevin's rotation." Kevin, our junior systems administrator, turned pale at his desk 3 rows over. Poor kid had no idea he was even on the rotation, because there hadn't been a rotation in 2 years. I'd been handling everything myself, every night, every weekend, without compensation or even acknowledgement. "But you always," Douglas started, then caught himself. "I always handled it as a courtesy," I finished for him. "But with Austin taking on the strategic leadership role, I thought it was important to make sure our official processes were being followed. We should have a proper on-call rotation with appropriate compensation. I can draft a proposal if you'd like." The beauty of it was that I was absolutely right. Every word was textbook proper procedure. Companies were supposed to have on-call rotations. People were supposed to be paid for after-hours work. I'd just been doing it for free for so long that they'd forgotten. It wasn't actually my job. Douglas opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to Austin. Do we? Austin, to his credit, was trying to look like he understood what was happening. "What's the timeline to fix these issues?" I pulled up the diagnostic reports. "The backup failure needs a manual restart and verification, about 2 hours. The email server needs cache clearing and disk cleanup, another hour. The 2 servers in protection mode need to be individually assessed and restarted, which could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours, depending on what caused the shutdown." "So we're looking at most of the day," Austin said, and I could see him doing the math. If I was tied up fixing problems, I wasn't available to teach him how to do his new job. "For one person, yes," I said. "We could expedite by assigning different team members to each issue, but some of these require senior-level access." Which only I had, but I didn't need to say that part out loud. Austin looked at Douglas. Douglas looked at Howard Hartley, who'd appeared in the doorway of his corner office, drawn by the commotion. "Just fix it," Howard said with the casual dismissiveness of someone who didn't understand that fixing it meant his new director of infrastructure was essentially useless. "Whatever it takes." "Of course," I said pleasantly. It took me until 2 p.m. to resolve everything, working at a steady, professional pace without the urgency I would have brought the previous week. No skipped lunch, no rushed diagnostics, no cutting corners to save time. By the time the systems were stable, I'd burned half a day that Austin needed for training, and I'd established a new precedent. Problems that occurred outside business hours would wait until business hours. That night, the same thing happened. Routine maintenance that I normally handled remotely was left to run automatically. and one of the scripts failed because of a known quirk in the system that required manual intervention. Wednesday morning brought more errors, more stressed looks, more passive-aggressive questions about why I hadn't just quickly fixed it the night before. Wednesday night, I silenced my phone at 6 p.m. and went to a yoga class. Thursday morning, Austin called an emergency meeting. "We need to talk about response times," he said, standing at the head of the conference table with the desperate authority of someone who knew he was losing control. "The last 3 nights, we've had system issues that weren't addressed until the following morning. That's not acceptable." "You're absolutely right," I said. "We need a proper on-call system with clear escalation procedures and appropriate compensation. I'd be happy to research industry standards and put together a proposal." "That's a long-term solution," Austin said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I'm talking about right now. These problems need immediate attention." "They're getting immediate attention," I said. "I'm addressing them first thing each morning, well within our SLA requirements for non-critical systems." "But you used to handle them right away, even at night." There it was, the admission that they'd been relying on my unpaid labor all along. "I did," I acknowledged. "But that wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't fair to other team members who never had the opportunity to develop those skills. Now that we have dedicated leadership for the department, it makes sense to establish proper procedures rather than relying on one person's voluntary overtime." Every word was HR-approved gold. I was advocating for work-life balance, team development, and proper procedures. I was being a model employee. I was also systematically removing every safety net they'd built on my back without ever asking permission. Austin dismissed the meeting without any actual decisions, which told me everything I needed to know about his leadership capabilities. Thursday night, I didn't just silence my phone. I turned it off completely and went to dinner with my friend Leslie, who'd been begging me to visit her new apartment for weeks. "You seem different," Leslie said over Thai food, lighter somehow. "I stopped caring," I said, and it felt like the truest thing I'd said in months. "About work. About making other people's lives easier at the expense of my own." Leslie raised her glass. "I'll drink to that." Friday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. 4 days of accumulated technical debt, 4 nights of unmonitored systems, 4 mornings of scrambling to fix what should have been prevented. The servers that handled our nightly data processing, the critical backbone of our entire operation, had crashed sometime around 2 a.m. The automated restart had failed. Error logs had piled up. By the time people started arriving at 8 a.m., half the company couldn't access their files. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. The office line, calling my personal cell, something they'd never done before because they'd never needed to. I was always there, always monitoring, always fixing. 1 call, 2, 5, 10. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and listening to NPR, watching my phone light up like a Christmas tree on the counter. 20 calls, 30, 50. I took my time getting ready. Shower. Breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese, whole wheat toast, fresh orange juice. I even did my full skincare routine, something I usually skipped on work days. The missed calls climbed higher. I left my apartment at 8 a.m., my normal departure time for an 8:30 arrival. The phone continued ringing in my purse, a steady vibration against my hip like a dying heartbeat. 70 calls, 80, 90. Traffic was light. I took the scenic route. By the time I pulled into the parking lot at 8:35 a.m., only 5 minutes late, the counter had hit 97 missed calls. The office was in chaos. People clustered in doorways, staring at frozen computer screens. The reception desk was surrounded by confused clients who'd arrived for early meetings. The sales team stood around their conference room like mourners at a funeral, unable to access the client data they needed for a major presentation. Douglas practically ran to intercept me as I stepped off the elevator. "Where have you been?" His face was red, sweat beading at his temples despite the air conditioning. "Getting ready for work," I said calmly. "I start at 8:30. "We've been calling you for 2 hours." I was getting ready for work. Did something happen? The question was perfectly innocent, perfectly infuriating. Everything is down. Douglas's voice had gone shrill. The file servers, the database, email, half the company can't work. Oh no, I said with precisely calibrated concern. When did this start? Sometime overnight. The alert started at 2 a.m. That's outside business hours, I said. Who was on call? Douglas's face went from red to purple. Greta, this isn't the time we need this fixed now. Of course, I said. Let me assess the situation and I'll provide a timeline. I walked to my desk with Douglas trailing behind me like an anxious shadow. Austin was already there, looking like he hadn't slept, his expensive suit rumpled and his hair disheveled. Can you fix this? He asked, and for the first time since I'd met him, the arrogance was completely gone from his voice. That depends on what caused it, I said, logging into my workstation. I'll need to run diagnostics. What I didn't say? I already knew what caused it. The nightly processing batch had a memory leak that I'd been manually clearing for 18 months, every single night, because fixing it properly required system downtime that nobody wanted to approve. Without that manual intervention, the leak eventually consumed all available memory and crashed the servers. It would take me about 45 minutes to fix once I actually started. I took 2 hours. Not because I was dragging my feet. I documented everything meticulously, following every official protocol, filing proper incident reports, and creating a detailed timeline of the failure for our records. You know, the things you're supposed to do, but never have time for when you're too busy actually fixing problems. By 11 a.m., the systems were coming back online. By noon, everything was stable and people could work again. The relief in the office was palpable, but it was the wrong kind of relief. It wasn't thank God that's over relief. It was thank God Greta fixed it relief, which meant they'd learn nothing. Howard Hartley emerged from his office and made his way to my desk. The entire floor seemed to hold its breath. Greta, he said, his voice carrying that forced casualness of powerful people trying to seem relatable. That was some good work getting us back online. Thank you, I said. Douglas mentioned there might have been some confusion about on-call procedures. There it was, the attempt to frame my adherence to actual policy as confusion. No confusion, I said pleasantly. I was just following the standard protocols. We don't currently have an on-call system with after-hours compensation, so I've been responding to issues during business hours. Right, but you understand that some situations require immediate attention, even outside normal hours. Absolutely. That's why most companies have paid on-call rotations with overtime compensation. I'd be happy to participate in one once it's established. Howard's expression flickered, just for a moment, with the realization that I'd backed him into a corner. Either he'd have to admit they'd been exploiting my unpaid labor for years, or he'd have to actually create a proper on-call system with appropriate compensation. Let me talk to Douglas about setting something up, he said finally. That sounds great, I said with a smile that was nothing but teeth. He walked away, and I returned to my keyboard, feeling the eyes of the entire office on my back. The rest of Friday passed in tense silence. At 4:45 p.m., Douglas called an emergency leadership meeting, Austin, himself, and notably not me. At 5 p.m. exactly, I shut down my computer and left. That weekend was glorious. I'd blocked my work number, turned off email notifications, and committed fully to being unreachable. Leslie and I drove to the coast, rented a small cottage, and spent 2 days doing absolutely nothing productive. I didn't think about servers. I didn't think about Austin Hartley sitting in my office. I didn't think about Douglas and his broken promises. Well, that's not entirely true. I thought about them on Sunday evening, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, and I smiled. Because I knew what was coming. Monday morning, I arrived at 8:30 to find my desk had been visited. Nothing was moved, exactly, but everything had the slightly disturbed air of someone having gone through my things. Probably Austin, searching desperately for documentation that didn't exist, for the cheat codes to a job he wasn't qualified for. At 9 a.m., Douglas called me into his office. Austin was already there, along with Barbara from HR, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an absolute shark's instinct for protecting the company. "Greta, thanks for joining us," Douglas began, and I noted the formal tone, the HR witness, the careful staging of this conversation. "We wanted to discuss your performance over the past week." "Of course," I said, settling into my chair with my hands folded calmly in my lap. "There have been some concerns about your responsiveness to critical issues," Douglas continued, reading from notes, which meant Barbara had prepared him for this conversation. "Multiple system failures that weren't addressed in a timely manner, missed calls, general lack of initiative." "I see," I said. "Could you be more specific about which protocols I failed to follow?" The question landed like a hand grenade. Barbara shifted slightly in her seat. She knew exactly what I was doing. "It's not about protocols," Austin jumped in. "It's about commitment to the team, about going above and beyond when the situation requires it." "I'm absolutely committed to going above and beyond," I said. "During compensated hours or as part of a properly structured on-call system with appropriate overtime pay. What I'm not committed to is unpaid labor outside my contracted hours." "Nobody said unpaid," Douglas said quickly. "Actually, let's clarify that," I said, pulling out my phone and opening a note I'd prepared. "In the past 6 months, I've logged approximately 380 hours of after-hours work, evenings, weekends, emergency calls. None of that time was recorded as overtime or compensated in any way. I have detailed logs if HR needs them for payroll correction." Barbara's expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes sharpen. Wage theft was serious business, legally speaking. "That was voluntary," Douglas said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Was it?" I asked. "Or was it an expectation of the infrastructure director role that I was informally filling while being paid as a senior engineer?" Silence, beautiful, damning silence. "Let's refocus," Barbara said smoothly. "Greta, we're not here to debate past practices. We're here to ensure clear expectations going forward. The company needs reliable after-hours coverage for critical systems. Are you willing to participate in that coverage? With proper compensation and as part of an equitable rotation with other qualified team members?" "Yes," I said. "I'm not willing to be the sole point of failure for after-hours issues while being paid for a standard 40-hour week." "That seems reasonable," Barbara said, making a note. Douglas looked like he wanted to argue, but Barbara's presence prevented it. Austin just looked lost. "We'll work on formalizing an on-call policy," Barbara continued. "In the meantime, if critical issues arise outside business hours, what's the escalation procedure?" "The same as any emergency," I said. "Contact the on-duty manager." I looked at Austin, who can then determine if the issue requires immediate attention and contact the appropriate technical staff with approval for overtime compensation. Translation: Austin would have to actually do his job as director and make decisions, rather than just forwarding problems to me. The meeting ended without resolution, which was itself a resolution. They couldn't discipline me for following policy. They couldn't force me to work unpaid hours. And they couldn't admit that their nepotistic hiring decision had created this entire mess. I returned to my desk and worked through my queue of tickets at a steady, professional pace. That night at exactly 6 p.m., I left. No checking email, no monitoring systems, no safety net. Tuesday morning brought the inevitable disaster I'd been waiting for. The nightly backup process, which ran automatically but required verification and occasional intervention, had failed catastrophically. Not just one server, but the entire backup chain. 3 years of carefully maintained redundancy, gone, because nobody had verified the process. This wasn't like the previous failures. This was company threatening. Douglas appeared at my desk at 7:45 a.m., before I'd even officially started. "Please tell me we have backups," he said, and his voice was shaking. I pulled up the logs. The Sunday night backup failed, the automated retry failed, the tertiary backup initiated but didn't complete. "So we have Saturday's backup." We should, yes. Should. I'll need to verify integrity. That will take several hours. Jesus Christ, Greta. Douglas ran his hands through his hair. How did this happen? The backup process requires manual verification, I said calmly. It's been on my list of process improvement recommendations for 2 years, but implementing automated verification requires system architecture changes that were never approved due to budget constraints. Translation. I'd been manually babysitting this process for years, and nobody had ever bothered to make it sustainable. The backup verification took all day. Not because it was technically difficult, but because I followed every single protocol, documented every single step, and refused to cut corners. By 5 p.m., I'd confirmed that Saturday's backup was intact, and we could restore from it if necessary. But we'd lost 2 days of work across the entire company. The financial impact was substantial. Sales data, client communications, development work, all gone. People would have to recreate 2 days of labor, and some things simply couldn't be recreated. Howard Hartley called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't invited, but the aftermath rippled through the office like a shockwave. Heads were going to roll. Wednesday morning, Barbara from HR requested a private meeting with me. This is informal, she said, closing her office door. Off the record. All right, I said cautiously. You're making a point, Barbara said. It wasn't a question. I didn't confirm or deny. The backup failure is going to cost the company roughly $500,000 in lost productivity and client impacts, she continued. Howard is furious. Douglas is terrified. Austin has been locked in his office, having what I believe is a panic attack. That's unfortunate, I said neutrally. Greta, I've been doing HR for 23 years. I know exactly what you're doing, and between you and me, they deserve it. What happened with your promotion was unfair, unprofessional, and possibly discriminatory. My heart rate picked up. Are you saying? I'm not saying anything officially, Barbara interrupted, but I am asking what it would take to resolve this situation in a way that works for everyone. Everyone, I repeated, or just the company? Barbara smiled slightly. Those aren't always mutually exclusive. I want the infrastructure director position, I said. The one I earned. The one I should have had 6 months ago. Full title, full salary, full authority. And Austin can be reassigned to a role that matches his actual qualifications. Business analyst, maybe. Strategic planning. Something where his MBA might actually be useful. Howard won't like moving his son. Howard's son just cost the company $500,000 because he doesn't know how to do a job he was never qualified for. I imagine the board will have opinions about that. Barbara was quiet for a long moment. There are no guarantees, but I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, can we avoid any more catastrophic failures? That depends, I said. Am I being asked to resume unpaid after-hours work to cover for inadequate staffing and poor management decisions? You're being asked to be patient while I try to fix a broken situation. How patient? 1 week. Can you give me 1 week? I considered 1 week of continued adequate performance. 1 week of letting the weight of my absence continue to build. 1 week, I agreed. But Barbara, if this doesn't get resolved, I'm not just going to keep working under these conditions. I'll find somewhere that actually values my expertise. Understood, she said. I left her office with something I hadn't felt in months, hope. The rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday passed in tense anticipation. The office had the feeling of a held breath, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Friday afternoon, at 3 p.m., Barbara called me back to her office. Douglas was there, so was Howard Hartley. Greta, Howard began, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. I waited. When we brought Austin into the infrastructure director role, we made assumptions about the position that turned out to be incorrect. We thought it was primarily a management and strategy role, but it's become clear that it requires deep technical expertise that Austin doesn't currently possess. Currently, as if 6 months from now would somehow be different. We'd like to offer you the infrastructure director position, Howard continued. Effective immediately, with the full compensation package we discussed for the role, plus a signing bonus to compensate for the delayed promotion. And Austin, I asked, will be transitioning to a strategic planning role under the business operations division, where his skills are better suited. I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring it. I accept, I said finally. Douglas actually sagged with relief. Thank God. Greta, I know this hasn't been easy, and I take full responsibility for how it was handled initially. Do you? I asked, and the edge in my voice surprised even me. Because from where I'm sitting, it took a company-wide catastrophe for anyone to acknowledge that I knew what I was talking about. You're right, Douglas said, and to his credit, he met my eyes. You're absolutely right. I made a terrible decision, and I'm sorry. The apology felt both genuine and insufficient, but it was more than I'd expected. We'll need you to resume your previous coverage of critical systems, Howard said. With proper compensation, of course. Barbara has drafted an on-call policy with rotating responsibilities, but given your expertise, you'll be the primary escalation point. I'll review the policy, I said, but yes, I can do that. Excellent, Howard stood, extending his hand. Welcome to the leadership team, Director Ashworth. I shook his hand, and this time it felt real. The transition happened quickly. By Monday, Austin had cleared out of the infrastructure director's office, leaving behind only the expensive desk accessories he'd optimistically arranged during his brief tenure. I moved my things in during my lunch break, trying not to feel too triumphant as I positioned my monitors and arranged my certificates on the wall. The team's reaction was quietly celebratory. Janet from accounting sent flowers. Tim from sales brought me a bottle of champagne. Even Kevin, the junior administrator who'd been accidentally thrown under the bus during my strategic withdrawal, stopped by to say congratulations. Does this mean things go back to normal? He asked hopefully. Better than normal, I said. We're going to actually document our processes, cross-train the team, and make sure nobody ever has to carry everything alone again. And I meant it. The anger that had driven my strategic withdrawal had burned itself out, replaced by something more constructive. Determination to build a department that actually functioned properly. Over the next few weeks, I implemented the changes I'd been recommending for years. Automated monitoring that actually worked. Redundant systems that didn't require manual babysitting. Documentation that meant our institutional knowledge wasn't trapped in one person's head. The on-call rotation was distributed fairly, with appropriate compensation. The team was empowered to make decisions without everything flowing through one bottleneck. And most importantly, we established boundaries, clear lines between above and beyond and exploitation. Austin, to his credit, handled his reassignment with grace. Or maybe his father told him to handle it gracefully. Either way, we passed each other in the hallways with professional nods and no drama. Douglas was more complicated. He knew he'd messed up, and the guilt sat on him like a visible weight. During our first one-on-one as director and manager, he tried to explain. I was under a lot of pressure from Howard, he said. The nepotism thing, I should have pushed back, but you didn't, I finished. No, I didn't, and you deserved better. Yes, I said simply, I did. We worked together effectively after that, but the relationship had fundamentally changed. The casual trust was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. Some breaks don't heal completely, they just get managed. 3 months into my new role, during a quarterly review, Howard called me into his office. The board noticed the infrastructure stability improvements, he said, sliding a report across his desk. Uptime is at 99.9%, incident response times are down 40%, and we haven't had a major system failure since you took over. We implemented proper procedures and adequate staffing, I said. That's what those things are supposed to do. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He paused, then added, I also wanted to say, officially, that how we handled your promotion was wrong. Not just unfair, wrong. I let family loyalty cloud my business judgment, and it nearly cost us one of our best people. Nearly, I repeated. You could have quit, most people would have. Quitting would have been easier, I acknowledged, but less satisfying. Howard actually laughed. I imagine watching everything fall apart without you was pretty satisfying. It had its moments. Well, for what it's worth, lesson learned. Merit matters, expertise matters, and taking people for granted has consequences. I left his office feeling something close to vindication, though not quite, because the truth was, I shouldn't have had to prove my worth by withdrawing it. The work I'd been doing all along should have been enough. But we live in an imperfect world, and sometimes the only way to make people see your value is to let them feel your absence. 6 months after my promotion, I was invited to speak at a Women in Technology conference. The topic was workplace advocacy, and I told a carefully edited version of my story, enough truth to resonate, enough discretion to avoid burning bridges. During the Q&A, a young woman in her 20s raised her hand. What would you say to someone who's in a similar situation right now, who's doing the work but not getting recognition? I thought about it carefully before answering. Document everything, I said. Your accomplishments, your contributions, your hours. Keep detailed records because you'll need them. And if documentation isn't enough, then you have to ask yourself a hard question. Am I waiting for this situation to get better, or am I just afraid to make it worse? What if making it worse is risky? It is risky, I acknowledged. Advocating for yourself always is, but staying silent, accepting less than you deserve, making yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable, that's risky too. It just risks different things. Your self-respect, your career growth, your mental health. So you're saying we should fight. I'm saying you should decide what you're worth and then refuse to accept less. How you do that, whether it's direct confrontation, strategic withdrawal, finding a new job, or something else entirely, that depends on your situation. But the first step is always the same. Stop undervaluing yourself. The audience applauded, and I saw recognition in many faces. We all knew what it was like to be taken for granted. We all knew the exhaustion of carrying more than our share. After the conference, several women approached me privately with their own stories. The promotions that went to less qualified men. The ideas that were ignored until a male colleague repeated them. The invisible labor that kept organizations running, but never appeared on performance reviews. I listened to each story, and I offered what wisdom I could. But mostly, I just witnessed their frustration and validated their experiences. Because sometimes that's what people need most. Someone who says, yes, that was unfair. No, you're not crazy. Yes, you deserve better. A year after getting my promotion, I ran into Austin at a coffee shop near the office. We'd successfully avoided any meaningful interaction for months, but the cafe was small, and pretending not to see each other would have been awkward. Greta, he said, with what seemed like genuine warmth, how are you? Good, I said, busy, you? Same. Strategic planning is actually really interesting, more my speed than the technical stuff ever was. That's good, I said and meant it. An uncomfortable pause stretched between us. Look, Austin said finally, I know I never really apologized for the whole promotion thing. That was messed up. It was, I agreed. I didn't fully understand what the job entailed when I took it, and I definitely didn't understand that you'd been doing it already, without the title or the pay. Did your father tell you to apologize? I asked. Austin laughed. No, actually. He told me to let it go and move on. This is just me being uncomfortable with how everything went down. Well, I appreciate that, I said. For what it's worth, watching you work after I took that job, the way you knew every system inside and out, the way you could diagnose problems in minutes that would have taken me days, it was humbling. I was way out of my depth. You were put in an impossible situation, I said. Being the boss's son doesn't automatically transfer expertise. No, it doesn't, he paused. I heard you speaking at that conference. My girlfriend is in tech and she sent me the video. You were really good. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't quit. The company would have been screwed without you, and I would have failed even harder. We talked for a few more minutes about inconsequential things, then went our separate ways. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was closure. The second year in my director role brought new challenges and opportunities. I hired 2 additional engineers, expanding our team and distributing the workload more sustainably. I pushed for and received budget approval for system upgrades I'd been requesting for years. I mentored junior staff, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. And most importantly, I stopped making myself indispensable by doing everything alone. Because I'd learned that being indispensable, while unrecognized, just meant being exploited. True leadership was building systems and teams that could function without any single point of failure, including me. During my second annual review as director, Douglas mentioned that I'd been nominated for a company-wide leadership award. The nominations cited your technical expertise, but also your commitment to building sustainable processes and developing your team, he said. That's not something everyone thinks about. It's important, I said. People shouldn't have to break themselves to do their jobs well. No, Douglas agreed quietly. They shouldn't. I won the award, which came with a bonus and a plaque that now sits on my office bookshelf. But the real satisfaction came from more subtle victories. The junior engineer who successfully handled a crisis without needing my intervention. The automated system that caught a potential failure before it became actual downtime. The full weekend, I spent camping in the mountains without checking my phone once, secure in the knowledge that everything would be fine without me. Because that's the thing about setting boundaries and demanding respect. It's not just about getting what you deserve in the moment. It's about fundamentally changing the relationship between you and your work, between effort and recognition, between loyalty and exploitation. Looking back on that moment when Douglas told me I hadn't gotten the promotion, when Austin Hartley sat there in his expensive suit, embodying everything wrong with nepotism and privilege, I can still feel the shock and anger. But I can also feel pride in how I handled it. I didn't explode, I didn't quit, I didn't make it easy for them. I just stopped doing the invisible labor that held everything together, and I let the consequences speak for themselves. 97 missed calls. That's what it took for them to understand what I'd been worth all along. And when they finally offered what should have been mine from the beginning, I took it, not with gratitude for their generosity, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly what they bring to the table. The office is quiet now as I finish this reflection, the servers humming steadily in the background, all systems green, everything running smoothly. My team is well trained, my processes are documented, and my boundaries are clear. I'm not the person who works until midnight fixing problems anymore. I'm not the person who sacrifices personal time to compensate for organizational dysfunction. I'm the person who built something better, something sustainable, something that values people instead of exploiting them. And if you take nothing else from my story, take this. Your labor has value. Your expertise has value. Your time has value. The moment you start giving those things away for free, you're teaching people that they don't have to pay for them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop. Stop overworking. Stop covering for bad management. Stop making other people's problems your emergency. Just stop and let the silence speak. Because 97 missed calls will teach them what 1,000 extra hours of unpaid work never could. That you were never the one who needed them. They needed you. If this story resonated with you, that subscribe button is still there. The Payback Office channel is built on stories like this, real experiences of people who stopped accepting less than they deserved and found their own form of workplace justice. We're building a community of 8,000 strong, and your subscription means you're part of that movement. Every story shared here reminds us that we're not alone in these experiences, and that standing up for ourselves, even quietly, can create real change. Join us and let's keep proving that knowing your worth isn't arrogance, it's survival.